Hello, I'm Margarita Noyes, and this is the sixth lecture in Father Paulo's course, Spiritual Therapy for Spiritual Diseases. Today we are going to look at a spiritual disease called lust, in Greek, Pornea. In a previous lecture, we located Pornea on the tree of sin. Do you remember? We had a tree that is sin, and the main trunk of it was philautia, love of self. And then the tree broke into three main branches, the first of which was gluttony, gastrimargia. And gluttony's first son, first offspring, is lust. So we know where Pornea falls on the tree. But today we are going to look at the disease of Pornea all by itself. Now, I wanted to tell you that as I have been listening to Father Paulo's teaching, I find his thoughts very profound, sometimes hard to understand, sometimes hard to conceive of, because they are different from what I have been accustomed to thinking. And in the past, I have always thought about lust and sexual sin as something that was very obvious. It's very easy to understand. We are supposed to have sex in marriage, and outside marriage, we are not allowed to have any sex at all. And we are supposed to abstain completely, just try to have no sexual feelings for someone who is not our husband or wife. Now, many people I know, especially young men, they feel angry toward God because they feel that God has set an impossible standard. God has set them up to fall. They feel that sex is like an itch that you're not allowed to scratch, that lasts all your life. They feel that the command of God is entirely negative. Don't do this, don't do that. That it's a big X. Father Paulo's teaching is not at all like that. In Father Paulo's teaching, he looks at what good sex, the way God designed it, looks like. He shows us how to look away from the disease of porneia and look toward the beauty of the holy, healthy sexual nature that God originally designed. So let's begin with a story told by St. John Climacus. I thought this was a very funny story when I first heard it. It's a true story. St. John Climacus tells the story about a certain monk who later became a saint. Now, somehow, this monk had the opportunity. He saw a naked woman, and it was a very, very beautiful naked woman. And of course, he was a holy celibate monk, so he didn't usually see naked women. But when he saw this woman, his reaction was to fall on his knees and praise God for the beauty of God, who was able to create such loveliness on earth. In fact, the sight of the naked woman caused this monk to fall more in love with God. It even caused him to be moved to tears in his love for God and his worship of God, because God created this woman. And Father Paulo says that this monk is an example of a person who is sexually healed. He is not sick with pornea. To be sexually healed, we have to have the ability to see the beauty of God through the beauty of his creation. We have to realize that every good and beautiful thing is a gift from God to show that he loves us. If we want to understand human sexuality profoundly, we have to begin with the understanding that human sexuality is sacramental. What does it mean to be sacramental? Well, let us think about sacraments. We have the Eucharist, the communion at Mass, the body and blood of Christ, which what we see is bread and the cup of wine. But what we know in our hearts, what we can see through the bread and wine, is the body and blood of our Lord Jesus Christ. The bread and the wine are sacramental. And with human sexuality, the man and the woman, singular woman, not plural women. So the man and the woman are sacraments. They are an outward visible sign of an invisible reality, which is Christ and the church. Husband and wife are a sign of the relationship between Jesus and the church. Now, Father Paulo isn't the only one who says this. He told us that in the early languages of Greek and Hebrew, when Paul wrote to the Ephesians, he said, "This mystery is great, but I speak of Christ and the church." And he used the word mystery. But when the Romans translated into Latin, they used the word sacrament. This sacrament is great, meaning the sexual relationship between man and woman. And in the Greek Orthodox Church, even today, the word mystery and the word sacrament are the same thing. They talk about the body and blood of Christ as the holy mystery, not as the blessed sacrament. So the relationship between man and woman is a great mystery. It is a great sacrament. But we don't see that. We see sex as extremely far from holy. We see sex as, especially outside marriage, as very carnal, very almost dirty. But that is not how the Apostle Paul saw it, or how the church has seen it from the beginning. The reason that we cannot see the man and woman as a sign of Christ and the church is because of original sin. Original sin has blinded us so that when we look at the body of a man and the body of a woman, the body of the man and woman become opaque. You cannot see through them. All you can see is the man and the woman. You can't look through them to the character of God. You can only see the bodies of the man and the woman. Their bodies have become opaque. But the problem is not in the bodies. The problem is in the eyes of the beholder. Because of sin, we cannot see through human beings to the character of their Creator. Let me see my notes here. Okay, so the next question is this. How did God create human sexuality? What was in his plan from the beginning? How did Jesus Christ express his sexuality? In fact, how did Adam and Eve express their sexuality before the coming of sin? These are the questions we will look at now. When you look at someone's body, a man or a woman, you are supposed to be able to see straight through that body to the character of God, the Creator. A man's body and a woman's body is supposed to be like a piece of clear glass, beautiful clear glass, through which you can look and see the beauties of God and creation. That was God's original plan when he created human sexuality. Let me tell you a brief story about my daughter and my husband. This is true. My husband is an artist, and he does very beautiful work. And you can see his work at his website, www.michaelnoyes.com. Well, about 6 months ago, my daughter, who is 21 years old, visited her father at an art show and saw his art. And she saw his early art and his later art and everything in between. And she saw the development of his art. As he changed, his art changed. But it was beautiful at the beginning, beautiful at the end, and beautiful at every stage in between. She was struck by the beauty of his art. And through that, she realized the beauty of his soul. No matter what stage of life he was in, the beauty of his soul shone through. Shone is past tense of shine. The light shines. In the past, it shone. The beauty of his soul shone through his art in the beginning, in the middle, and even it shines today. Well, when we, as people, look at the beauty of a human being, we should be struck by the nature of the Creator of that human being. We should look right past the human being to see not only the beauty of the human being inwardly, but even beyond that, to the beauty of God. And when God originally designed human sexuality, he intended for it to be a window through which we could see him and through which we could relate to him, a sign of God and his people, Christ and the church. But do you remember that story St. Augustine told of the foolish bride who received a gift of a ring from her bridegroom, and she forgot about the bridegroom and fell in love with the ring? She was fixated on the ring. We are like that. We get fixated on the beauty of the person, when really the beauty of the person is supposed to be a springboard that takes us up to the beauty of God. As with all the beauties and goodness in our life, we should look at it and say, how great is the God who created this? Just last night, I was at a meeting for my work. I teach English for Chesterfield County Public School. That's the secular government public school system. And we had a teacher meeting. And you know, they're not Christians there. It's secular. It's not religious at all. Well, it was the end of term teacher meeting, and there was a beautiful spread of food on the table for us. Every great thing you could think to eat. And when I went up with my plate, there was a teacher next to me who was a Muslim. She was in a Muslim dress. She's obviously a religious Muslim. But anyway, we came up together to the table, and I looked at it and said, amazing, how good is God? And she was like, what? And I said, I laughed and I was embarrassed, but I told her, I am translating a course right now by a Catholic bishop who was speaking about gluttony. And she was like, what? Gluttony? She understood, and I told her that the Catholic bishop, Father Paulo, recommended that when we see the good food, we say, how great is God, that what is good for us also gives us pleasure, and we glorify and give him love for it and worship. And she really liked that. She was charmed by it. She looked so happy. So this is a theme in this course, that when we see a good thing, we see a beauty, we see something which is good for us and also gives us pleasure, we should see right past that to the Creator who designed the system, that which is good for us also gives us pleasure. So here we are again. We look at the beauty of the man or woman and we say, amazing, how good is God who created such loveliness. Their bodies become like a glass. Notice how balanced the Holy Fathers are when they talk about sexuality. They neither glorify it and deify it, nor demonize it and say it's bad, it needs to be repressed. But they put it in the place of blessing and worship God through it. Now, one problem that many people make when they look at sexuality is they consider it to be part of our animal nature. So they think, let us study the sexuality of animals, and that way we can understand human sexuality. That is the wrong way to understand human sexuality. If you want to understand human sexuality profoundly, you must look at the spiritual dimension, which the animals don't have. For animals, sexuality is instinct. It is the act of reproduction. There's no spiritual involvement at all, as far as we know, for animals. But for people, the primary spiritual organ is the brain, not the genitalia. For animals, it's the genitalia. But for man, the primary spiritual organ is the brain. And sexuality is more seated in the spirit, in the love between the partners, in the imagination and fantasies. I don't mean lustful fantasies. I mean, as Aristotle put it, the merger of imagination and memory, the cognitive conception of what's happening. Father Paulo talked about a book that was written by an Australian psychologist. The book was called Why Are Men This Way? And it gave a recipe for what men need to do to be men. And it talked about how in order to be healthy and mature and calm in their life, men have to be able to see something sacred in the sexual act, in their sexuality. This was written by a non-believer, a non-Christian. Even non-Christian psychologists see that human sexuality must be primarily something spiritual and sacred, not just an animal act. There was another researcher by the name of Kinsey, who was an American scientist who had a specialty in studying animals. And he published a report of American sexuality that was based on animal sexuality. And he looked only at the material aspect of the sex act. And any psychologist today who is at all objective admits that this is not the way to understand human sexuality. Sexual behavior, which is just about the act, is not satisfying, it is not healthy for human beings. The church does not forbid random casual sex because sex is dirty or unworthy or evil or sinful. It forbids random casual sex because sex is sacred. It can only be rightly expressed within the bonds of holy matrimony. Father Paulo gave a very extreme example. He said, and he was a little embarrassed about this, a little reluctant to give this example. He said that to just have sex with anyone is like taking the Holy Sacrament, the Eucharist, and he said taking it into a voodoo parlor. And he said everybody knows that something this holy cannot be taken into a place that evil or that profane. But for us, English-speaking Americans, we have to think of a different example. Maybe taking the Holy Sacrament and throwing it down in the gutter, stamping on it with your foot and grinding it into the filthy dirt, peeing on it. All of that would be profaning the Holy Sacrament, the Eucharist. Father Paulo suggests that to take your body out to the streets and combine it with anyone is a similar act of profanity. At this point, I had a conversation with the student that was translating for me. And we were in a car. We were driving to pick up my son, Toby. And I shared with the student some thoughts I was having about a TV show that we have in America. It's called House. This is a TV show about a medical doctor named Gregory House. So the show is called House. And this doctor is an atheist, and he has no respect for the holy. And I want to share with you right now the clip of the conversation that I had in the car with Pedro, who was translating Father Paulo for me. This is an unedited clip. It's just raw audio tape. So maybe you won't be able to hear it as well, but see if you can hear it. I just want to share the conversation we had. let me say something, and that way we'll get it also on the tape. I was deeply offended by the last episode of House that I saw.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because House has been in love with Cuddy for a long time, and they got together, and then House basically blew it, and Cuddy decided she didn't want to be with him anymore because he was undependable. And then House went out and got a very beautiful and lovely girl to become his girlfriend so that he could make Cuddy jealous. And it wasn't enough just to have her. He also married her within a week or two.
Wow.
She was an illegal alien who needed a green card.
Yeah.
And so it was going to be a marriage of convenience, not a real marriage. But he was doing it to make Cuddy jealous. So they held a full wedding ceremony in the chapel. But it wasn't a religious wedding ceremony. And, just a second, turn this off. I'm almost thinking we should ignore it when it's on.
It's on.
Okay, so the wedding ceremony was like a farce of a religious ceremony. And Cuddy was so hurt by the fact that House was marrying this girl that she had to leave the ceremony cut to the core. And House was kind of happy about that. And in the background you heard, as Cuddy was leaving in tears, you heard House making his vows. Do you, Gregory House, promise to love and honor and, till death do you part, etc. And he said, yep. He didn't say, I do. He said, yep. Kind of just showing no respect whatsoever.
Yeah.
And then when they got home that night, the girl who he married, who was really lovely, truly lovely woman, very beautiful and very good and kind and loving, said to him, I know this isn't a real marriage, but I really like you. And she appreciated him for who he was and started to give him a kiss, as though they could have sex together. And he brusquely pushed her away and said, I can't do this. You sleep over there. I'm going to bed. And he walked away. And she was cut to the core. So sad. And that was the end. And what Father Paulo said was, sex must be in the context of holy matrimony because sex is sacramental and sacred. Well, the assumption of Father Paulo is that matrimony is undeniably sacred. So sacred that goes without saying. And to place sex within the holy halls of matrimony is to recognize the sacredness of sex. And it occurred to me that House has sex anytime he wants. He has sex with several prostitutes a day if he wants. Sex is completely not sacred, completely profaned. And now he's showing his complete disrespect for the institution even of civil marriage and for the making of vows, which he made and had no intention of keeping. And I feel that House is completely contemptible and despicable in every way. So we're going to have to text Toby and see if we can find him.
Okay.
I think this is the way. No, this is not the way.
I guess what's charming about House is that he's very intelligent and very witty.
Yes, and he is in his own way loving toward the patients.
Yeah.
In that he wishes them to be healed.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to text Toby, but don't turn off the screen flow.
Okay.
It'll only take a second. Just a second. This isn't working well. I'll just do it here. Okay. Yeah. And also I want to say, in the show House, I think the show is a very damaging show because sex is treated in this sort of casual way by everyone, and everybody is having sex freely, as though there's no sacredness whatsoever, purely animal. And marriage also means very little. Telling the truth means absolutely nothing. There is no telling the truth, even between closest friends. There's no trust, even though they talk about trust and the importance. There's no morality, really. And then there was one other thought I had. They demonstrate homosexual sex between beautiful women, 13, and other very beautiful female prostitutes have lesbian sex on screen in a way that is instructive to girls, so that girls will say, oh, that's how you do it. Because women don't automatically have an idea of how lesbian sex could possibly work. I've spoken to many women who've puzzled. They say, I can understand how men can have sex between men. This is obvious and intuitive, but how can women do this? And they can't imagine it. Well, the show has demonstrated it in a way that was both instructive and attractive, so that girls, young girls, could say, that's what I want. Okay, you can turn it off now, because we're probably about done. So back to our class by Father Paulo. I want to emphasize that according to Father Paulo, true human sexuality cannot be experienced outside of holy matrimony. Not should not be, but cannot be. Here, I would like to refer you to an article written by Olavo called Apierokalia. This is one of the articles that I'm studying with Roxanne de Carvalho, Olavo's wife. She is teaching me Portuguese, I'm teaching her English, and we use Olavo's articles. She reads them in Portuguese and I listen. I read them for her in English and she listens, and we learn our languages. Well, we studied this essay, Apierokalia, and it has a point. It makes a point that I think is very relevant at this point. You can find this article on www.olavodecarvalho.org and type into the search function Apierokalia, and you'll come up with both a Portuguese and an English version. But I want to read you a short excerpt from the end of the article